Welcome to the Science of Hockey, the podcast where we break down the science behind ice hockey. I'm the analyst, your host, and every week we explore the data, research, and evidence that shape how we play, train, and understand the game of hockey. From biomechanics to performance psychology, we take you beyond the rink and into the research lab, giving you insights that go beyond hearsay and into what really makes the difference on the ice. Whether you're a player, a coach, a parent, or just someone passionate about the sport, we're here to bring you scientifically backed information in a language that's friendly and easy to understand. So grab your skates and let's dive into the science of hockey. Welcome to the Science of Hockey, where we explore the data driving the game. I'm your host, the analyst. Today, we're uncovering the hidden challenges of early sports specialization in ice hockey, focusing on its impact on hip and groin health. Stay tuned to learn how intensive, year-round training might be shaping the future of young players.
Okay, so picture this. You're at the rink, and you see these kids absolutely glued to the ice.
Yeah.
I mean, they're practically living there, right?
Yeah.
Dreaming of one day hoisting the Stanley Cup.
Absolutely.
And you think, wow, that's incredible dedication.
Right.
But then there's that little voice in the back of your head that whispers, is all that intense focus really good for them? Especially at such a young age.
That is the question, isn't it? And it's becoming more and more relevant as youth sports just get more competitive.
It really is. That's why today we're taking a deep dive into some fascinating research from the Journal of Athletic Training.
Oh, yeah.
It's all about ice hockey and whether going all in on the sport early on could lead to hip and groin problems later.
Yeah, that's a big concern these days, for sure.
It is. And I think it's something that a lot of parents and coaches grapple with.
Absolutely.
So before we even jump into the findings, can you just quickly define sport specialization for us?
Oh, yeah. That's a great place to start because I think there is some confusion around that term.
Yeah.
So we're not just talking about kids who enjoy a sport and spend, a good amount of time practicing. We're really talking about prioritizing one sport to the exclusion of others.
Okay.
So think intense year-round training, maybe even quitting other activities to focus solely on that one sport.
So it's not just about being a multi-sport athlete versus a single-sport athlete.
Yeah.
It's about the intensity and the trade-offs you're making,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And that's what this particular study tried to get at.
Okay.
They looked at collegiate ice hockey players, and they divided them into groups based on how specialized they were in hockey before high school.
Got it.
So low, moderate, and high specialization.
So focusing on those pre-high school years, that's really interesting. How did they actually measure whether there was a link between that early specialization and hip problems?
So they used a questionnaire called the Hip and Groin Outcome Score, or HAGOS.
HAGOS, okay.
Yeah, and it's not just about whether the athlete has had a major injury. It's asking about a wide range of symptoms. Pain, stiffness, clicking, and how it impacts their daily life and their performance in sports.
So it's about how those hips are actually functioning day to day.
Precisely.
Okay, so what did they find? Was there a connection?
The results were pretty clear. The highly specialized players, the ones who went all in on hockey before high school, they reported significantly more hip and groin issues.
Significantly more. How much more are we talking?
We're talking 46% more likely to have problems compared to the less specialized players.
Wow, 46%. That's a huge difference.
It is, and it really makes you think about the potential long-term costs of that early intense training.
It does. And one finding that I found particularly interesting was that the total number of years playing hockey didn't seem to matter as much as that early specialization.
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? You'd think the more you play, the more wear and tear you'd have.
Right.
But the study suggests that those years before high school might be a particularly vulnerable period.
So it's not just about the total time on the ice, but when that time and intensity are happening.
That's a great way to put it.
Now, I'm curious about the mechanics of skating. What is it about those movements that might make the hips and groin so vulnerable?
Well, skating involves a lot of deep hip flexion, abduction, rotation.
Okay.
So picture this. You're bringing your knee up towards your chest, moving your leg out to the side, twisting at the hip.
Yeah, okay, I can see that.
And all those movements, when you're doing them over and over again, can put a lot of stress on the structures within the hip joint.
And those structures are still growing and developing in young athletes. So.
Exactly. We're talking about the labrum, which is that ring of cartilage in the hip socket.
Okay.
The articular cartilage, which is that smooth surface that allows the bones to glide easily. And then, of course, the muscles and tendons that surround the hip.
Right. It's a complex system.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's especially vulnerable during those growth spurts.
Now, you mentioned the study looked at overall hip and groin dysfunction. not just traumatic injuries.
Mhm.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So the questionnaire they use, it goes beyond just asking, did you tear your groin?
Right.
It's asking about pain stiffness, catching any kind of limitations in your movement.
So it's painting a picture of how those hips are feeling and functioning in everyday life.
Exactly.
And what did they find there?
Well, the highly specialized hockey players, they reported more problems even with things like walking upstairs or just sitting for long periods.
Wow. So it's not just affecting their performance on the ice, it's impacting their quality of life in general.
That's what's so concerning about these findings. It's like a hidden cost of early specialization.
It is, and it raises some serious questions about how we're approaching youth sports.
It does.
Now, one of the most striking findings to me was that female athletes who specialized early in hockey reported even more hip and groin problems than their male counterparts. Why might that be?
That's a great question, and we need more research to understand it fully.
Okay.
There are a few theories that might explain it. One has to do with anatomy. Women tend to have wider hips than men, which can affect the angle of the thigh bone in the hip socket.
Interesting.
And that can put more stress on certain structures.
So different stresses make sense.
Right. And then there's the hormonal aspect.
Okay.
Hormonal changes during puberty, particularly estrogen, can affect the laxity or looseness of ligaments.
Right.
And that increased laxity can make the hip joint a bit less stable, especially when you're adding those repetitive high-impact forces from skating.
So it's like a perfect storm.
Yeah.
The body's going through all these changes, and then you add the intense training on top of that.
Exactly. It really highlights the need for training programs that are specifically tailored to the needs of young female athletes.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to the broader issue of how we approach youth sports in general.
Absolutely.
We've seen that early specialization in hockey might be linked to these hip and groin problems, but what about other sports?
That's a great question, and it's something that researchers are looking into more and more. There's growing evidence that early specialization might not be the best path in a variety of sports.
So this isn't just a hockey problem.
No, it's potentially a youth sports problem in general.
Interesting. What are some other sports that might be particularly risky when it comes to early specialization?
Well, a few come to mind immediately. Gymnastics, dance, tennis, baseball pitching, volleyball, swimming.
Okay. What do all those sports have in common?
They all involve repetitive, high-impact or high-stress movements and often focusing on very specific joints.
Right.
So you think about the extreme flexibility in gymnastics, the overhead serve in tennis, the powerful pitching motion in baseball.
Right.
When young athletes specialize too early in these sports, they're putting a tremendous amount of stress on their developing bodies.
That sounds like a case of too much too soon.
That's a good way to put it. And the irony is that this intense early specialization might actually be hindering their long-term athletic development.
How so?
By focusing on just one sport, young athletes might miss out on developing a broader range of athletic skills and movement patterns.
Right. They're not getting that well-rounded foundation.
Exactly. And they might be neglecting important muscle groups or not developing the same level of coordination and agility.
So they're building a house on a shaky foundation.
That's a great analogy. And when that foundation starts to crack, it can lead to all sorts of problems, not just physical, but emotional and social ones, too.
Like what?
Well, when you push young athletes to specialize too early, it can lead to burnout, stress, anxiety, and even depression.
Wow.
They might lose the joy of playing sports because it becomes more about meeting external expectations than their own passion.
That's really sad.
That is. And when they specialize in one sport, they also miss out on those social connections and life skills you develop from being part of different teams and activities.
Right. They're not getting that breadth of experience.
Exactly. It's like they're putting all their eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
And if that basket breaks, well, the consequences can be pretty devastating.
It's a lot of pressure to put on young shoulders.
It is. And I
Yeah.
think it's something we need to be having more open and honest conversations about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's have that conversation. What are some practical things that parents, coaches, and young athletes themselves can do to help prevent these problems and create a more balanced approach to youth sports?
Well, I think that's a great place to start. I think the biggest thing is just encouraging young athletes to participate in a variety of activities.
Okay, so not specializing early, but diversifying early.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about building that foundation, you know.
A strong athletic foundation.
Right, exposing them to different movement patterns, different physical challenges.
Can you give some specific examples of what that might look like?
Sure. So think about encouraging your kid to try different sports, soccer, swimming, track and field.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be just traditional sports either. Things like dance, martial arts, rock climbing, even parkour can be fantastic for developing agility coordination, balanced body awareness.
So it's not just playing more sports, it's playing different sports that challenge the body in different ways.
You got it. That's the key.
Right.
And it's not just about physical development either. These activities can also help with social skills, teamwork, resilience, all those good things.
So it's a win-win.
Yeah,
They're getting those benefits, and they're less likely to get burned out or injured.
exactly. Now, another thing that's really important, and I think we've kind of lost sight of it a little bit, is free play.
Oh, yeah. Just letting kids be kids.
Exactly. Unstructured time for them to run around, explore, use their imaginations.
I think we overschedule our kids so much these days.
We do. And it's a shame because free play is so important for development.
Absolutely. Now, I know some parents worry that if their kid isn't specializing early, they'll fall behind, and they won't be able to catch up later on if they do decide to focus on a sport.
Yeah, that's a valid concern.
Yeah.
But the research actually suggests the opposite.
Really?
Yeah, early specialization might give you some short-term gains. But in the long run, those athletes who have that broader base often catch up and even surpass their peers.
So slow and steady wins the race.
That's it. Think about it. An athlete who's developed a variety of skills and a strong foundation, they're going to be able to adapt more easily to the demands of a specific sport later on.
They're more versatile.
Exactly. More resilient. And they might even be less prone to injuries.
Right, because their bodies are used to a wider range of motion.
Exactly. Overuse injuries are a huge concern, and early specialization is a major risk factor. So by diversifying activities, you can reduce that risk.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about diversifying activities, but what about rest and recovery?
Oh, that's huge. And I think it's something that's often overlooked.
Yeah, I agree. There's this mentality that more is always better.
Right. But when it comes to young athletes, their bodies are still growing. They need time to recover and adapt.
So how much rest are we talking about?
It depends on the individual, their age, their training, load the sport.
Sure.
But in general, young athletes should have at least 1 or 2 days a week completely off from organized sports.
Completely off. So no practices, no games,
Yeah.
nothing.
Ideally, yeah. It gives their bodies a chance to truly recover and rebuild.
Okay.
And then they should also be taking some time off from their main sport throughout the year. A few weeks or even a month off season.
I know that's tough for some families to do, especially when you see everyone else training year-round.
It is. It's a mindset shift. But it's important to remember that sometimes less is more.
Right. Pushing harder isn't always the answer.
Exactly. Now let's talk about strength and conditioning.
Okay, because I think there's sometimes a misconception that strength training is only for older athletes.
Right, but that's not true at all. Strength training is crucial for young athletes too.
Yeah.
It's not about bulking up or lifting heavy weights. It's about building functional strength, improving neuromuscular control, teaching them how to move their bodies safely and efficiently.
So what kind of exercises are we talking about here?
Things like planks, squats, lunges, deadlifts,
Okay.
with proper form and appropriate weight, of course.
Right, safety first.
Always. And it's really important to work with a qualified coach or trainer.
Absolutely, someone who understands the needs of young athletes.
Exactly. They can design a program that's tailored to the individual.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about early detection. What are some signs that a young athlete might be having hip or groin problems?
Well, any pain that is persistent or interferes with their ability to participate in their sport should be taken seriously.
So don't just brush it off as growing pains.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Look for things like complaints of pain stiffness, clicking, a feeling of catching or locking in the hip joint.
Oh.
Watch for changes in their gait or movement patterns. And if you notice anything unusual, it's always best to err on the side of caution and get it checked out.
So what's the first step if a young athlete is experiencing hip or groin pain?
The first step is to see a healthcare professional who specializes in sports medicine. So someone like a sports medicine doctor, a physical therapist, or an athletic trainer.
Okay, and what will they do?
They'll assess the athlete's condition, figure out what's causing the pain, and come up with a treatment plan.
So it's about getting a proper diagnosis and not just trying to figure it out yourself.
Exactly. Early intervention is key.
Now, we've focused a lot on the potential downsides of early specialization,
Yeah.
but it's fair to say there are potential benefits too, right?
Oh, sure. For some athletes, early specialization might be the right path.
Right, especially if they have a real passion for a particular sport and they're highly motivated.
Exactly. But it's important to approach it with caution and make sure it's really the athlete driving that decision.
Not just the parents or the coach pushing them.
Right. It's about finding that balance and putting the athlete's well-being first.
I think that's a good point to emphasize. We've been talking about this research on hockey, but a lot of these principles apply to other sports as well.
Absolutely. We're talking about fundamental principles of training development and injury prevention.
Right. And I think the potential risks of early specialization should be considered in any sport that involves those repetitive, high-impact movements.
That's a good point, especially in sports where young athletes are putting a lot of stress on their joints.
Right? Like we were talking about earlier with gymnastics and dance and tennis.
Exactly. Those sports require a lot of flexibility, strength, and precision. And it's easy to overdo it.
And the consequences can be pretty serious.
They can. Not just physically, but emotionally, too.
Right. When you push kids too hard too soon, they can lose that love for the sport.
Absolutely. And that's the last thing we want.
Exactly. It should be about fun and enjoyment and developing a lifelong passion for movement.
That's what it's all about.
So it's really a complex issue with a lot of factors to consider.
It is. There's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right. Each athlete is different. Each sport is different.
Exactly.
And I think it's important for parents, coaches, and athletes to have these conversations and make decisions that are in the best interest of the individual.
I agree. It's about putting the athlete's well-being first.
Always.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really insightful deep dive.
It has.
I feel like I've learned a lot about this issue.
Me too.
I'm curious to hear your final thoughts, though. What's the one thing you really want listeners to take away from this episode?
I think the most important thing is just to remember that early sport specialization is a complex issue.
Okay.
There's no easy answer. There are potential risks and benefits.
Right.
And the best approach is really going to depend on the individual, the sport, the whole context.
It's not black and white.
Exactly. And I think it's also crucial to remember that the goal of youth sports should be to promote the well-being of young athletes.
Absolutely. Physical, emotional, and social well-being.
Right. And that means prioritizing long-term athletic development over short-term gains.
And fostering a love of sports that will hopefully last a lifetime.
That's what it's all about.
Well said. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your insights.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of this complex issue of early sports specialization.
We encourage you to keep learning and have those conversations with your kids, your coaches, your healthcare providers.
Right. Make informed decisions that are best for your individual situation. And remember, the most important thing is the health and well-being of these young athletes. Oh, yeah. Now, we've been talking a lot about this idea of well-rounded athletic development. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, it's really about exposing young athletes to a wide range of movement patterns and physical challenges.
So it's about building that strong athletic foundation.
Exactly. You got it. So encourage them to try different sports, dance classes, martial arts, rock climbing, parkour. All those things are fantastic.
Okay.
It's all about developing that agility, coordination, balance, body awareness,
And those skills can really transfer to other sports down the line.
Absolutely. A young athlete who develops, good overall coordination from playing soccer, they might find it easier to pick up the footwork in tennis.
Right.
Or a gymnast with strength and flexibility could benefit them in almost any sport they try.
So it's almost like investing in their athletic future, giving them that toolkit of movement skills.
Yeah, exactly. And it helps prevent those overuse injuries too.
Right. Because they're not doing the same thing day in and day out.
Exactly.
Now, I know some parents worry that if their kid isn't specializing early, they're going to fall behind. They're not going to be able to catch up later if they decide to focus on a sport.
I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
But the research actually suggests the opposite is true.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Early specialization might give you some short-term gains, but those athletes who have that broader base often catch up and surpass their peers.
So it's kind of like the tortoise and the hare.
It's a great way to put it. Think about it. An athlete with those varied skills and that strong foundation, they're going to be more adaptable.
Right.
They're going to be more resilient and less prone to injuries.
So they can stay in the game longer.
Exactly. Which is what we want.
Yeah.
Overuse injuries are a big problem. So anything we can do to prevent those early on is going to help them have a longer, healthier athletic career.
Absolutely. So we've talked about diversifying activities. What about rest and recovery?
Oh, rest and recovery is so important. And I think it's often overlooked.
Yeah, in this culture of always pushing harder.
Right. But when it comes to young athletes, their bodies are still growing and they need that time to recover.
Rebuild.
Exactly. So how much are we talking about? It depends,
Sure.
But at least 1 or 2 days a week, completely off from organized sports.
Completely off nothing.
Ideally, it gives their bodies that chance to really recover and rebuild.
Okay.
And they should also have time off from their main sport throughout the year A few weeks, even a month off season.
So a real break.
Yeah, I know it can be tough.
Especially when you see everyone else going year-round.
Right. But it's really important for their long-term development.
So sometimes less is more.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about strength and conditioning.
Yeah.
I think there's a myth that it's only for older athletes.
Oh, yeah. Strength training is actually really beneficial for young athletes.
Okay.
But it needs to be done correctly.
Right. Be safely.
Absolutely. It's not about lifting heavy weights. It's about building that functional strength, improving their neuromuscular control, teaching them how to move their bodies safely and efficiently.
So what kinds of things should they be doing?
Think body weight exercises, planks, squats, lunges, core work, that kind of thing.
So building that foundation.
Exactly. And it's crucial to work with a qualified coach.
Right. Someone who knows what they're doing.
Absolutely.
Now, shifting gears a bit, what are some signs that a young athlete might be having hip or groin problems?
Any persistent pain that's interfering with their ability to train or play, that's a red flag.
So don't just dismiss it as growing pains.
No, definitely not. Things to look out for: complaints of pain, stiffness, clicking, catching, locking in the hip. Any changes in their gait or movement patterns?
Okay.
If you notice anything unusual, get it checked out.
So err on the side of caution.
Right. Early intervention is key.
So who should they see?
A healthcare professional specializing in sports medicine.
Okay.
Someone like a sports medicine doctor, a physical therapist, a certified athletic trainer.
Okay, so someone who knows what they're looking at.
Exactly. They can assess the problem, figure out what's going on, and develop a treatment plan.
So don't just try to figure it out yourself.
Right. Leave it to the experts.
Now, we've talked a lot about the potential downsides of early specialization, but there could be benefits too, right?
Oh, of course. For some athletes, it might be the right path.
Right, if they're really passionate and motivated.
Exactly. But you got to approach it with caution.
Right. Make sure it's the athlete driving that decision.
And not the parent or the coach.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance and putting the athlete's well-being first.
Always.
Now, I think this conversation goes beyond just hip injuries in hockey.
Yeah, I agree.
It's really about a philosophy of youth sports.
Yeah.
It's about creating that healthy environment where kids can thrive.
That's what it's all about.
So what are your final thoughts on this whole topic? What do you want our listeners to take away from this conversation?
I think the most important thing is to remember that the goal of youth sports should be to help young people develop a love of movement, a love that will last a lifetime.
That's beautifully said. So it's not about winning championships or getting scholarships.
It's about so much more than that. It's about helping them develop physically, emotionally, socially.
Right. It's about the whole person.
Exactly. And if we can do that, if we can create that kind of environment, then I think we're doing something really special.
I agree. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation.
It has. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of youth sports and athletic development.
We hope this has given you some food for thought.
Absolutely. And remember, it's all about those young athletes. It's about their health, their happiness, their long-term well-being.
That's what matters most.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of knowledge and discovery.
Thanks for tuning in to the Science of Hockey. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share it with your friends, teammates, or anyone who loves hockey as much as you do. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment to let us know what you liked, what you'd like to hear next, or any questions you have. Your feedback helps us make the show even better. Until next time, keep your skates sharp, your mind open, and keep chasing the science behind the game.